Good morning to everyone, or perhaps afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. I am sitting on the West Coast, so it is morning for me. But I really appreciate everybody who's joined for different time zones. I know for some people this is lunchtime, for some people this is the middle of your morning, so very much appreciate it. My name is Carrie Rogers. I am an executive advisor with PsychArmor, and I'm going to be kind of hosting and emceeing our conversation today. We're also joined by Lindsay Church, LC, who is the executive director and co-founder of Minority Veterans of America. Before we really start, a couple of things. We are recording today, so I just wanted to let everybody know that. And I wanted to lay the ground, sort of the tone and the ground rules for what we're going to be doing today. But first and foremost, I want to offer our sincere thanks and appreciation for everybody who's taken the time to be here with us today. Those partnerships are really important to us at PsychArmor. They're really important to LC at Minority Veterans, and they're really important right now in the world in which we live, to have partnerships where people can come together, talk, have open communication, and hopefully work to make the world a little bit more comfortable and safe for everybody. So I really appreciate everybody's time today. We want to lay some sort of ground rules and foundation. We always do this at PsychArmor in this time and with this particular topic. Today we're talking about understanding the LGBTQIA veteran experience, and we want to make sure that we set a tone that everybody is on the same page with. So we want to make sure everybody's voice can be heard. We want to be as much as possible mindful of the language that we use as we talk today. Now that, nobody gets everything right all the time, and that's okay. We're gonna do the best we can to support one another in that, but just be thoughtful about the words we do and the words we use and the way we approach things. Everybody's going to do their best, and that's part of the assumption that Lindsay and Elsie and I will be making as we talk with you all today. And we want to make sure that everybody here kind of allows for that too. That goes to the prime directive that we have at PsychArmor when we do these things. So we have something that I'm actually going to read to you because I think it's beautifully written, and I think it's really sets the groundwork for where we're at today. Our prime directive in this hour that we have together, in this series that we're going to have in June, but maybe even in the work that we all do with one another outside of this session, we really want to start by saying, regardless of what we discover, we understand and truly believe that everyone here is doing the best job they can, given what they know at the time, given their skills and abilities, the resources they have available, and the situation at hand. And we want to make sure that everybody in this space is sort of on board with that, especially acknowledging that right now, with this particular topic, there's a lot of change going on. And that change is coming hour by hour, it's coming minute by minute, and information that we thought was up to date yesterday might not be anymore. And so we are all kind of joining these conversations with the best intention. And so if we can all keep that in mind, I think that'll be really helpful. To frame our conversation today, Elsie is going to kind of lead us through some things. They're going to talk a little bit about their personal experience and perhaps some stories from other folks who have served, and what's going on now and what the background is for some of these conversations. Elsie's going to talk with us a little bit about background information, some statistics that might be helpful for context here, the size of the LGBTQIA community, some health disparities that may be important for you all to know as providers, some gaps in services. But ultimately, we want this conversation to be about what can providers, and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, so I come to this with that hat on as well. What can we do to create spaces in the settings that we provide care that are affirming, that are culturally informed, and that are supportive, even when we're currently working in a climate that doesn't feel like that all the time. So, what can we as individuals do? What do we need to know? And what can we do to really create a safe and helpful space? So, to kick us off, we have a video that we're going to watch. So, our PsychArmor staff is going to be pulling up a video that's about the legacy of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So, I'm going to go on mute while we do that, so you don't get my background noise. And Emily, if you could pull up that video, we'll start there.
I think the audio is not running. Emily, I think you'll need to restart the video and share the audio on that.
Do I want to be seen as a veteran? The reason I'm having a hard time with that question is because I guess it's similar to asking a question about, do you want to be seen as a survivor? Right? I struggle to be a veteran, the person who was in an abusive relationship with a system that did not see me and did not value me. Before I joined the Army, I was 17 years old, living homeless with my best friend. And so the thing that I thought I needed more of was structure, discipline, and then having a place to call home. But I served from 2003 to 2008. And the policy during that entire period was don't ask, don't tell. By that time, I had fallen in love with my best friend. And so I had a double life. And it was in 2007 I got that phone call. I talked to my sergeant. I said, my friend has been shot. He said, if this is just a friend, like, I'm sorry, but we can't give you any time off. And it was then that I told him that this was my partner and that this was my fiance. And he went to go tell the commander. My commanding officer said, you should surrender your weapon and expect a dishonorable discharge. I lost the single most important person to me to police violence during a routine traffic stop. I wake up every day without him. I will wake up every day for the rest of my life without him. What I am the most regretful of is that I spent 5 years of my life chasing discipline and structure from a system that didn't give a damn about me. There were some pretty big reasons for me not to want a dishonorable discharge. You don't get any of the benefits that have been promised to you, college education, the GI Bill. But the most important reason that you don't want a dishonorable discharge is because you were not dishonorable in serving your country. That being queer and being honorable are two things that can exist together.
All right, let me see if I can pin in here. How do I add a pin? I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to replace the pin. Hello, I don't know how to do both of us at the same time. Hi, everyone. I am Lindsay Church. I'm the Executive Director of Minority Veterans of America. I identify as trans non-binary. I use they, them pronouns. I'm really excited to be gathering with you all today I've seen that video no fewer than a dozen times, and every time it really like evokes a strong sense of emotion and reminders of what serving in the military was like under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I served in the United States Navy from 2008 to 2012. I served all but 3 months of my time under the Navy's policy of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Not everybody knows this. I actually joined the military twice. Once when I was in high school getting ready to leave under the delayed entry program. I figured out at that point that I was LGBTQ and I fell in love with my first partner, and I knew that I couldn't join the military if I didn't know who I was. And so I actually decided not to go, and I ended up staying behind and doing a few things for a few years, and really still felt a strong sense of I need to do something to serve my country. I need to do something to serve my community. And I still felt a strong sense of service. I'm third generation. My mom had served in the Navy, my grandfather in the Navy. We have a few Air Force folks, and if you're on Air Force on the call, we make jokes. We don't talk about the Air Force very much in our family, but it's just like our running joke. I do believe that everybody it's service, but I just have to make the joke. So I ended up staying behind, but then in 2008, I still felt that really strong sense of duty and purpose and belonging that I wanted to be in the military. At the time, there was no end in sight to the policy of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It was a really challenging policy to live under. I still today have been out of the military for 12 years now, and I often still 13 years now. And I often still think about the legacy that that policy has left in my life, the scars that I carry as a result of that service, and the unique traumas of watching it happen again. As a person that served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, fought the policy, saw the end of it, we're now in an era that I'm watching trans service members experience very similar things. Their service is being stigmatized to the point where they're being told that they're dishonest and they're just distrustful. And so watching these videos as we live in the era that we do, it's re-traumatizing. And we live it again while we watch our friends lose their careers and lose their lives to discriminatory policies that don't need to exist. Our community has served at a higher rate than most American population, especially transgender people. 1 in 5 transgender adults in this country has served in the military, which means that we serve at twice the rate of the cisgender population of America. And so, all of that being said, the Department of Defense is one of the largest employers, if not the largest employer of trans people in the country, which means that the Department of Defense, TRICARE, and the Veterans Health Administration are the largest providers of healthcare to transgender people in this country. So when we talk about policy and we talk about the impacts of policy changes and regressive policies that take away our rights and our dignity and our healthcare, we're looking at a problem that is more systemic than we're really thinking about. If we can't access 1 in 5 people can't access healthcare anymore, where do we go and where do we turn? That's why I'm really excited and proud to be working with you all and have the opportunity to work with PsychArmor. Thank you for doing this. It's not an easy time to be doing this. And when I made the call to colleagues that we needed to be talking about what does it look like to provide care and dignified care and discrimination-free care, we, built this community practice model to really spread the word about what it can look like, even in the face of discrimination and marginalization. How can you still create a space and a practice for the community that needs the access to healthcare the most? And so I'm glad to be here today. When I was leaving the military, I was leaving under medical retirement, and I left the military with very few plans. I was under the you will serve until any day now you get medically retired, and any day now took 2 years. So much like our colleagues that didn't have a plan, the trans service members getting purged, I didn't have a chance. I didn't have a chance to figure out what I was going to do next, and so I really struggled leaving service. And the first 3 years of a veteran's transition are the most critical periods of time. It's when we can either catch people or we lose people. And oftentimes we lose people not just to the system, but often to suicide and to mental health crisis. And so it's really important that we now think about how do we systemically catch those people in those first 3 years, because those are the most vulnerable years in a veteran's transition. I left with what I call a fractured identity. And so when I served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it was like having two parts of myself. I have like a slide that has like a half of a brain, and one's like super rainbow and one's like red, white, and blue. And it was like this idea that I had two parts of myself, like I couldn't put them together. So in the military, you have to compartmentalize. You have to hide your LGBTQ self because you could get kicked out, much like this, much like the video, like get a dishonorable discharge. So you pull these parts away from each other. You pull yourself apart and you create these two um, exclusive identities that don't know how to work well together. And so when I got out of the service, I really struggled with my transition, not just because it was hard because transition, because it is, but because I was also trying to put myself back together and I didn't know that I had this real fracture in my identity. It took me a long time to really get back into the queer community because I felt like I had betrayed my community by serving and saying, I'll just put myself voluntarily in a closet and that will be more important than my queer self. And I held this like deep sense of shame for the service that I had rendered to this country and what I had felt like I had done to my LGBTQ community. And so whether or not that was valid, I now know like, hey, actually didn't do anything wrong. But at the time, I really couldn't see that those two pieces of myself had needed to come together. It wasn't until I was sitting in a conference and somebody was talking about the lasting legacy of Don't Ask, Don't Tell that I realized I had this really deep fracture in my identity that I really needed to figure out how to put back together. And so many people that serve under these policies in which you have to hide yourself experience these extreme like breaks in your identity. Many of us are divorced as a result because we don't know how to have these relationships. My ex-wife is a lovely human being, but I also could not put all of these pieces back together. And so it really was like I had two parts of myself still as a civilian. That I had myself that did veteran stuff and I had myself that did queer stuff, but I didn't have myself that did both. And so it took me a very long time and lots of therapy to really work through what does it mean to put these pieces back together? What does it mean to be fully and authentically yourself? And in this time, it's actually very challenging, and I'm so glad that I did the work long before this moment. But truly, much of our community struggles with this still today. The scars and the legacy of this policy meant that you really had to hide and hide yourself in shame. And to the video point, I didn't serve dishonorably. Like I served honorably in my country, and I deserve the ability to live my life in the way that as a full human being. And so when we talk about LGBTQ service, many of us carry these scars that we don't actually know about, and that's why it's so important to create these affirming spaces. Without the affirming spaces, there's times that I probably never would have talked about it. Times that I never would have realized that I actually had a lot of post-traumatic stress coming from my military service and serving under deeply discriminatory and highly illegal policies, and that I really had to repair those pieces. And so these affirming spaces that we create are so powerful to being able to really touch the lives of people and bring them into a system that is meant for them, but that they don't feel the trust that they feel like they should have in a system that oftentimes doesn't see them. So that's my story, and I'm really glad that I have the opportunity to be here. I want to just say if you have questions along the way, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. Very informal, so we're gonna have a conversation today, but don't wait till the end. If you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and I'll try to answer them along the way. All right, so let's get into it. So I'm a data nerd, I can't help it. So I'm going to give you a little lay of the land as far as how many of us there are. So there are currently approximately 1 million LGB veterans, about 135,000 transgender veterans. It is estimated that there's about 79,000 actively serving LGB folks and about 15 to 20,000 transgender service members. I give these numbers with a very deep caveat. Our community has experienced data erasure since the beginning. Some of it willingly, because many of us don't want to be put on a list, because here we are, the list is being used to purge people. So many of us have a mistrust of data, but also because we've not been seen, we often don't get counted. And so when we think about the number of 1 million LGBTQ veterans, we hear this a lot. That number actually dates back to 1999 in a prevalence study that was done. I can't remember the organization that's done it, but that data is over 25 years old, but we don't have anything newer. Nobody has been able to do a better population estimate, and that means that I wasn't even out yet. I was still in high school. I wasn't queer yet. I was always queer, but I didn't know who I was yet. Wasn't even serving yet. Like there have been a lot more of us, especially as policies change. When we look at 2012 being the marker of Don't Ask, Don't Tell ending, 2016 being the first announcement that the trans policy would change, we've seen eras like 2021 to 2025 when more trans people served because it was open policy. Those numbers are not correct. They're what we use because we don't have any other way to tell you how many of us there are. However, there are far more of us now, especially in the most sexually and gender diverse communities and country that we've ever seen. There are so many more of us that are out there that are never being counted, and data erasure continues to be a problem. Now, data erasure sounds bad, but the problem really comes from with data erasure comes the erasure of resources. When we talk about framing problems, if we don't know how many of us there are, we never look at what are the biggest disparities we experience. We have some studies here and there, but we really don't get the dedicated resources because if you can't frame a problem, then you can't see a problem. That's a Crenshaw quote that talks about intersectionality. We have to put a frame around the problem and the understanding in order to be able to really create change and to be able to really address that problem. We actually don't know enough about our community, even after we've been serving since the Revolutionary War. We don't know enough about our community to be able to dedicate the resources. And we live under discrimination every single day, especially in the land of policy. When it comes to resources through the VA, through the Department of Defense, especially healthcare related, now we're seeing more regressive policies than I've ever seen. I've never seen anything like this. This is a really challenging time, and we'll get into a little bit more about the policy, but we're seeing more attacks in our community than we've ever seen before. And those numbers are going to continue to be obscured because they don't want you to know how many of us there are. It took a long battle for LGBTQ advocates to even get us on the census. And I think that is also going to change in the next couple of years, but hopefully we got counted in the last one. But really all of that is to say that without the understanding of our community and even how many of us there are, we don't get the resources that are necessary in order to be able to address the problems that we have. We do have some numbers that are some things and understandings through studies and through different efforts led by advocates to be able to tell you a little bit more about the health disparities. So as a result of our service, especially living under these highly discriminatory policies, we have many health outcomes that are different than our communities. So I'm going to lay some numbers down to you. On the front of mental health, LGBTQ service members are 2 to 7 times more likely to attempt suicide. That's a big number. When it comes to suicidal ideation, we see it's 2 to 3 times higher. If you have gender dysphoria, you're 20 times more likely to attempt suicide. We also have higher rates of PTSD compared to the rest of the general population of veterans, which has about 17% of the general population. 53% of my community experiences post-traumatic stress. Not just because military service is inherently traumatic, because it absolutely is, but many of us lived under these policies of discrimination that are part of our everyday lives. And it was open season on people like us to serve. We lived under leadership that continued to target us and marginalize us and get us in trouble. We have many stories that I could tell you, but I won't do today. But about the daily discrimination, the harassment, the sexual violence that we experience. Trans people in the military are the most likely to experience sexual violence and sexual harassment. Gay men are the second most likely, and then it goes lesbians. And so our entire community takes up the top 3 rungs of military sexual violence, which means that we also experience military sexual trauma at a much higher rate. So the difference between sexual violence in the military and military sexual trauma is the secondary condition of living under sexual assault or experience everyday harassment. Sexual harassment. And so military sexual trauma we have a high rate of prevalence in our community, one of the highest. We are also more likely, as a result, to engage in binge drinking and smoking and other risky behaviors that continue to be prevalent in our lives when we look at our long-term health outcomes. Our community experiences lower life expectancy. We experience, more likely to self-medicate because we don't often get the resources and service that we need. And so, I have a report that I will drop here at the end of this. It's the New York State did a minority veterans needs assessment back in 2020 or 2021. That report talks about all of the factors, whether it be housing, healthcare, economic employment. Talks about 5 factors that were that they talked about as far as like the whole veteran themselves. In each one of those, that talks about the LGBTQ experience and some of the numbers and data, especially around housing and healthcare, that are really important to our community that help illuminate some more of the disparities that I didn't necessarily touch on. As far as service gaps, our community is more likely to hold other than honorable or disparate care. You came off from mute. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about, and I wanted to reemphasize this point that you made. You've talked about the size of the community being undercounted. So we really don't know how large this community is. So the undercounting results in being under-resourced. But this is actually exponential. The problem is exponential because it's also a community that's not only under resourced because it's undercounted, but is at high risk, right? Has high need. There are serious health disparities, and so that undercounting is exacerbated. The under resourcing is sort of exponentially problematic
Well,
because not only are we not resourcing at a level that just the count, an accurate count, not the count that we have, but an accurate count would give us, but even that count is under resourced because the needs of this community are greater. So this is actually quite a layered problem. Um, and then there's just sort of the interaction between the individual person who, for very good reasons, may not want to be counted, and the system, which needs the count so that they can resource this individual person. And it's super complicated.
well, I often say that, especially in the lane of suicide prevention, right? We talk, the community or the policymakers have been working on suicide prevention efforts in the veteran community because one in 22 or 18 to 22 veterans die by suicide every day. If you really wanted to make an impact on a number, you would go for the people that are most likely to experience suicidal ideations, most likely to die by suicide or even attempt. And instead of moving towards the communities that need it most or are most likely at risk to reduce that number, they use a blanket theory that if I just give all these resources to everybody, it'll be fine, we'll hit that number. But if you truly wanted to make that dent, you would look at LGBTQ status, you would look at gender. Women veterans are also most likely to die by suicide. You would look at race, you
Mm-hmm.
would look at how all these factors play together. And you would really dedicate those resources towards the biggest, like people that make up the biggest share of the folks that die by suicide. And instead we pretend like it doesn't exist. We pretend like our community isn't
Yeah.
there, that if we just don't count, that it doesn't matter and it won't be a problem. But true and dedicated resources are have to use an intersectionality theory, no matter if that word is dirty or not. If we're going to look at veterans and we're going to look at combat veterans, that's intersectionality. If we're going to look at veterans and we're going to look at LGBTQ veterans, that's intersectionality. And we have to use that lens. Why? Because just a veteran alone doesn't necessarily tell us what we need to know when it comes to addressing mental health disparities, economic outcomes. That lane of veteran and military service member alone does not give us the things that we need in order to truly address the problems and see what we need to see in order to be able to dedicate those resources. So
Well, and it's really interesting because what we know about resources and what we know about education is that the messenger matters and the delivery matters. And so, really, we're talking about a need for tailored resources that speak to a
Taylor,
specific audience. And when we sort of do this for veterans, that's really the audience is so broad that it really isn't as effective as
you
if we're
mean
really
just
looking
pointing at
at these high risk groups.
19 million people doesn't count? So I
Well,
mean,
it doesn't say it counts, but it certainly doesn't seem to be very effective for really anybody in that community. You know, we haven't made a dent on this in a larger community. I think some of that is because we aren't tailoring what we're doing well. And that means we actually have to look at all these variables, which right now that's gotten really, really tricky.
mhm.
We've never done it particularly well. We've been trying to make inroads into that, partially because of organizations like Minority Veterans of America and your advocacy and sort of bringing a voice to this, which I thank you for. And you know, we've just been getting started talking about this and doing something that's a little bit more effective, and the
Yes,
culture has
we are.
shifted in a way that's really tricky.
To be clear, the culture itself hasn't shifted, the policy has shifted.
A really good point. Yep.
Like I refuse to accept that overnight our culture changed because I
I
think,
I really appreciate that distinction. That actually made me feel just a tiny bit better.
yeah, I
So
mean,
thank you for that.
we didn't change. Like we might have to change the way that we approach things. We might have to, I mean, my community has to deal with the fact that our policies have changed, but I refuse to believe that our community itself has changed because I know how much inroads we've made in the last been doing this for almost a decade now, and I've seen so much progress, especially in the last few years. And to your point about tailoring, here's the thing: is that oftentimes the words intersectionality are considered, dirty words. We don't talk about that here. There's a theory out there that when you make services better for minority communities or for marginalized people, if you really go to the outside of where we are, like the furthest out you can reach, if you make things better for that community, you make things better for everybody. I use the example of closed captioning. We often use closed captioning because hearing impairment or generally hearing impairment. Well, people like me, I'm autistic. I also have like brain slow, like doesn't quite catch everything. And so actual captions help me to be able to really catch what I'm trying to do and better show up. It also means that recordings are available more often, which means that people that don't like, think about college campuses. I can't make it to class. They create a recording because I have disabilities and I can't make it there. Well, the kid that missed class because they have a football game is also benefiting from the fact that there's a recording available. All of these, strategies that we employ that are tailored or considered tailored are actually better for everybody. We've seen this in the VA did a childcare pilot. You would expect that women veterans would be the ones that used it most. It was actually grandparents. It was grandparents that have appointments at VA that are childcare providers for their families and had to go to the doctor. So it's actually older men who were using the VA that needed to use those childcare facilities. So when we think about tailoring, it's not actually meant to be that this group gets this exclusive benefit that you don't. It's actually that if I make this better for one community, I will make it better for everybody, and more people will have access to the things that they need. So
And we don't even know what that's going to look like sometimes when we do this, right? Like, who would have thought?
no one
So
thought
those
that
are,
was the pilot.
yeah, right. And yet we helped a different group than we knew about. And so it makes me think about science. Sometimes we discover things that's not what we went in looking for, but we really helped, it took us in a whole different direction. So when I think about that and I think about the undercounting and the under-resourcing, it's exponentially impactful.
Correct. I mean, and I think we can make so many more inroads in how we create services for everybody. Should we actually look at a model that cares about the individual experience?
Mhm.
I know, like, I've been part of the military community for a very long time, and I think about the like, suck it up, buttercup. But like, I'm not a veteran, I'm not a service member anymore. I don't need to suck it up. If I actually just had culturally like competent providers, people that are willing to meet me where I am and ask me the questions that I need to be able to better set up these environments, it actually might help everybody. And we know that because we've seen that throughout history and throughout the services that we've designed, that if we just look to the margins and the furthest out margin that we can possibly understand, we listen to those people and we figure out what are the things that you are experiencing, what are the things that you need. We can create a better system that is more humane and more able to see everybody.
I love that. And actually, you're sort of like what you just said about like what can we as individuals do? How do we make that's kind of where we're going here.
Mhm.
So I'm excited to really talk with folks about what that looks like. But I stopped you. You were about to talk about service gaps, and then we were going to watch another video. So
Yeah. So as far as service gaps exist, talking about discharge status of individuals, everybody gets a characterization of their service. For anyone not familiar, when you leave the military, you get a DD 214. It tells you what the characterization of your service is. For the LGBTQ community, especially because of policies like Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the military trans ban, the now military trans purge, we are looking at communities that are experiencing discharge, more than likely, other than honorable or dishonorable discharges, at a much higher rate than the rest of the population of veterans. And so what that means is that people don't have access to the benefits and services that they were entitled to when they went into the military. There are about 13 to 14,000 that DoD knows about that were discharged under policy of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. It means that on a very specific characterization of their service, it said something about sexual orientation and like failure to assimilate or failure to adapt. People hold that stigmatization and they carry that discharge unless they take the onus to go and upgrade it. And when you've been hurt by the military in the way that you have, oftentimes people are like, you know what? I'm never going back. I'm never going to fix that. And so they often leave with that characterization of discharge and they never get access to benefits because they choose not to fight. which I totally understand, because why would you fight in a system that has already told you that you're less than human? Why would you fight for benefits to be a part of the Veterans Affairs system that will also treat you in similar ways that you were treated in the military? So many people still hold these characterizations. I will say this about the Department of Defense. They did a very poor job of collecting information about who holds these discharges. They say they think that there's about 14,000 people, but they actually estimate there could be up to 28,000. Now, what bothers me the most about this is that a person walks away with one DD-214, just one. They carry that mark and that scar with them forever. And the Department of Defense doesn't even have a count of whether or not they were kicked out under this policy. There's no automatic upgrade. There's no blanket. Everybody gets a new DD-214 in the mail. It's on you to go fight the system. And we don't actually know how many of them are. How many lives we ruined? We don't know. It's probably about 14,000, might be more. And that hurts me as an individual who holds like a discharge. I don't have, I have an honorable discharge, but like thinking about my community holding that discharge paperwork in their hand, knowing that their service was honorable, that they rendered to this country, and still they have to fight a system in order to be able to even access VA benefits, in order to even go to college like they were promised. All of these things we're more likely to hold them than the general population, and yet we think there might be 13 or 14,000, which I think to me bothers me so much thinking about what's going to happen next with the military transpurge. They're looking at kicking out about 4,000 individuals blanket. What are they going to keep track better this time? Are we going to figure out when one day when we beat this policy that we're going to fix all of these discharges? Are they going to keep records this time? Are they going to make sure that one day when this policy is real unconstitutional, that we make sure that we can contact those people? The answer is I don't know. This could happen again to another generation of service members who are now getting ready to be purged from the military. So I will also, I'm a little bit over on my time, so I'm just going to roll into the video here and talk a little bit about policy changes and what that does to trust. So Emily, I'm going to have you start that video if you're there.
News, Boston.
The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs will phase out treatment of gender dysphoria. NPR's Quill Lawrence reports this follows President Trump's executive order to end any distinction between sex and gender by the federal government.
Last week, the VA rescinded a memo that protected gender-affirming care. And now, VA Secretary Doug Collins says treatment for gender dysphoria will be discontinued. Collins said trans-identifying vets are still welcome at the VA for other care. But advocates say the change in policy means they will not feel welcome or safe at VA facilities, and they warn that discouraging trans vets from getting critical health care will have dire consequences. VA research shows that trans veterans have higher rates of death by suicide. The VA provides health care and benefits for about 9 million veterans. VA estimates that fewer than 0.1% identify as trans. Quill Lawrence.
So, for those who are not following, recently the Department of Veterans Affairs changed its policy prior to this year, around March. Veterans could go to the Department of Veterans Affairs and receive access to gender-affirming care in the form of hormone replacement therapy, prosthetics, facial hair removal, voice training, and a comprehensive suite of care that was available to them in order to be able to treat gender dysphoria. And as of March, those policies have all been rescinded. And the biggest problem beyond the fact that the care is no longer available, it's that our care has been stigmatized to the point where people are talking about it like some type of special care. For those unfamiliar with gender affirming care, things like hormone replacement therapy, when we talk about hormone replacement therapy, most people don't know that cisgender women are most likely to receive that care. Men with low testosterone also most likely to receive that hormone replacement therapy. Hormone replacement therapy was not designed for trans people. It is used in the treatment of gender dysphoria, and it's going to continue to be offered at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Nothing is changing. The only thing is that they're saying to me is that they don't care if I live or die. When we change these policies, it's more than just a sad day at the VA. What they did was rescind not just the care itself, but they also rescinded the discrimination protections while couching it in saving money. I can tell you that a person that dies by suicide is not saving you money in the pittances that you will pay for hormone replacement therapy. When you look at the emergency intervention for suicide prevention, that costs a whole lot more than even 2 to 5 years worth of hormone replacement therapy. And continuing to stigmatize this care to the point where we're saying that we're going to take the money. We don't know how much we spend on it, but we're going to take that money and we're going to put it into care for paralyzed veterans. That pits me and my community against paralyzed veterans, not even recognizing that my community is also a part of that community. I have a spinal cord stimulator. I have, people that are in wheelchairs. I have people in my community that are also transgender that also happen to be both. When we stigmatize this care and we treat it, and, he was very cruel in the way that he announced it, we're no longer offering cross-sex hormones. Let me be clear, we're not receiving anything special. We're receiving hormone replacement therapy, which is, again, the same thing that would be offered to cisgender people for the treatment of menopause, low testosterone, and other health conditions that will continue to carry on. And yet nobody is saying your hormone replacement therapy is going to be stigmatized because I don't think that you should receive it.
So basically, if I'm not a veteran, if I were a veteran and I were receiving hormone replacement therapy as a cisgender female for menopause, that's fine.
That's fine.
That continues.
Yes.
But for someone who does not identify as a cisgender female, that exact same prescription can no longer be offered.
Correct. And the additional barriers that people don't necessarily know about is that when you think about women receiving hormone replacement therapy, some women actually are receiving testosterone because of low testosterone levels. That's considered cross-sex hormone therapy by VA. They have to get a special waiver in order to be able to receive that care. So you're actually creating, when you think about these barriers that we're creating for transgender people to make us like the freaks of society, you're also making it harder for everybody to access this care. And if you did not stigmatize it to the point that it made us these like outsiders, women wouldn't also have to struggle in order to access that healthcare. So when we talk about this, like, it's not just a transgender people issue, it's actually a broader issue among the general population. Now, what they have said is that for hormone replacement therapy specifically, you can continue to, if you've already received care prior to like March 27th, I think was the memo, you can continue to receive that care. That's not actually happening across the board. There's still people that are being denied. And anybody new receiving care or looking to receive care will be denied. They're also saying that service members, if they are receiving hormone replacement therapies in service, that they can go and then access that care at VA. What they're not telling you is that the DHA, the Defense Health Agency, has pushed out a memo that said we'll no longer offer hormone replacement therapy on base. You have to go somewhere else. When we think about these two systems coming together, there's no guarantee that service members who had access to this before will actually be able to go to the VA. And we're looking at abandonment of care. It's not just like a denial of care. We're looking at people who are receiving this care, had access to it regularly, now being pushed off of base and into the community, and then being pushed and forced to the VA to prove that they were receiving this in service with no guarantees that they're going to receive it. This is care abandonment, and as a provider, we should be looking at, is this actually lawful? Is this something that is within my oath as a provider? And how do I make sure that this community doesn't feel as if their care is completely abandoned because they don't have access to either the healthcare that they need that's affirming or the discrimination protections that they need to access the building? Because they don't talk about the fact that I can now be harassed openly anywhere in the building with no recourse whatsoever. I can be harassed in bathrooms. I can be told by staff that I am going to be treated by female standards, whether I like it or not. All of these things have now been rescinded, but they're also making it about cross-sex hormone therapy without telling you that it's open season on transgender people in the Department of Veterans Affairs. So the cruelty seems to be the point here, that the ability to access care, and they're saying that you can keep coming here for everything else. Well, if I'm a trans woman and I have long hair sitting in a waiting room, and I'm all of a sudden being called Mr. in front of the entire clinic, how then do I access my care? How then do I not feel as if the humiliation of it all is the point? And so we had planned to spend a lot more time in the next session. We'll talk more about creating these spaces. But it's never been more important to figure out how can we work within the confines of the policies that exist while also still providing that affirming care. There's no need for you to shout Mr. Whatever in the waiting room. You could just call somebody by their name in order to be able to create a space in which that person is not humiliated. There are ways that we can get around some of these policies that will allow us the opportunity to provide this affirming care without also getting you in legal troubles or whether or not you abide by certain policies. And so we're going to dive into that over the next few weeks, really getting familiar with how do we work within the confines of what we have, and how can providers that work outside of the VA system pick up some of the slack for the VA when it comes to providing that care. Because as a person that doesn't receive any federal funding, I can do and say a lot more that oftentimes the people that do receive that federal funding cannot. And the same thing goes for care settings. When you're on a federal facility, there's a lot of things that you can do that's very different that would actually not just be awesome, but could save a life.
Well, and I think that, yeah, no, but I think that we probably can talk a little bit about what that looks like outside of a VA setting, right? And I think that's where a lot of, some of the folks who have joined us come from. And I worked in VA for almost 2 decades, and I still work with VA providers a lot. And I will say that for the vast majority of people who provide individual care in the VA, this is not how they want to proceed with the individual human beings that they work with. This is not comfortable space for them. These are policy decisions that are often not a reflection of the individual providers in this space. Having said that, I think there are going to be a lot more people who, upon leaving DoD or even just choosing not to receive care in VA anymore, a lot of veterans who will be moving into care in other spaces, whether that's their first choice or not. And so I do think we can probably spend a little bit of time, and I would like to open this, as we're chatting, I would love to see some Q&A from folks. I mean, this is an opportunity to ask Elsie some questions.
Yeah, this is an Ask Me Anything session, so anything goes.
Yeah.
If it's problematic, but ask me anything. This is really an opportunity what can I do to answer your questions?
But I would like to know also, given, and I think this is really important now, for the individual providers, and probably a lot of them here are outside of VA, what does that look like? I mean, you just said one in the waiting room, maybe not using Mr., Ms., Mrs., whatever, right? But just calling people by their name so that you really take that variable out of it. What are some other things that you know from your own experience or from just working in this community for a really long time, small things even? Like, how do you have a space where people walk in and can take a breath because they can see things or feel things and know that this isn't going to be a challenge?
So I think about this in a lot of different ways. The first is like thinking about how the person that you're working with is going to get to you. As always, the last thought of that thing is like training and education is really great. But let me tell you, if they can't get to your office, it doesn't matter. If they get harassed in the bathroom, if they get harassed in the front desk, if they get treated poorly before they even get to you, that's actually the problem because they'll never get to you. So I always really think first, how can I set up an environment in which people can get to me? And so I think about what information am I providing ahead of time? On my website, what does it say? This is a safe and affirming space. When I'm autistic, so like I look at everything before I go, like know before you go again. I think about how can we set up and give people the information about where gender neutral restrooms can be located in your building. What are the policies? I'm a big fan of posting harassment and discrimination policies up front so that people know, like, actually, your policy says this. I used to carry VHA Directive 1341 with me because I was harassed quite regularly. And I would be like, actually, this is the policy of your agency. If you really want to push me, I know the secretary. I will call him. Like I would get harassed pretty regularly. And so I would carry this policy with, but it was my backstop and it made everybody stop because of discrimination, you will lose your job. And so I think knowing what are the discrimination protections that I can expect? What are the ways in which I can report discrimination? That's a really big one. How do I know if I am discriminated against and I'm harassed or I'm, experience marginalization? Who do I call? How do I make sure that the harassment doesn't continue? And how do I make sure the harassment stops there? And so I think about how do you set up the environment to make sure that people have that information so that they know that if they go, that one, somebody's thought about it, and two, I know I have an outlet should something happen, because sometimes things do. So thinking about how do people get from the parking lot into your building? I think about like I visualize things a lot. So like how would a person like me leaving my car get to you in your office? What are the touch points? Are they going to go through security? Does security know not to like sir and ma'am people? Does security know to say hello, just welcome? Where are the bathrooms located? Discrimination protections. There's all sorts of things that, especially in today, and I know that many people receive federal funding. We're learning more and more about who does. I need more posters to stay up that this is a safe, welcoming, and affirming space because I'm making the same decision that everybody else is making. Do I continue to receive my care at VA? Is it worth it to get a dental cleaning, or should I just go out in the world? Like, because at this point, it's really feeling like there's very few things that I feel are worth it to go into the VA. And so many of the care settings are actually civilian care settings because my wife has insurance. And so I'm looking at how do I, where are those signs? Where are the everyone is
Mhm.
welcome here? Where are the, Pride Month stuff, the rainbows? The VA itself has banned rainbows. Just wild to
Yeah,
me.
I heard that, which is a little bit
Well,
wacky
they're
given that
using a
rainbows.
wild. They're saying that no rainbow flags or no flag other than the American flag can be flown, but they're using that pretty broadly to say that you can't even have a rainbow lanyard. No stickers, no posters, like, no magnets, no rainbows anywhere. And I'm like, this is just feels like very Soviet and sad. Like, just feels like no color here. And
So
that's
in
not
the
everybody.
community, are those things something that, like, we have a question, what things can a clinician do or say to signal they're an ally? So even having visual cues in
Visuals,
your,
wear a lanyard. I always tell people to introduce yourself with your pronouns because a person like me right now does not actually know that I can talk to people. I don't, as a non-binary person, I've just actually given up on fighting people because at this point I don't even know who I can fight about whether or not they use they and them because the world seems to have erased people like me. And so and I go to care settings where the person is like, "Hi, I'm Dr. So and so. My pronouns are they and them, or she and her, or he and him." That tells me you give a shit. Excuse my language. Sorry, I can't help it. I'm a Navy
that's all
veteran, but
right.
like that tells me that you care. That tells me that
Mm-hmm.
you care enough to signal to me that you think that there might be something there. For people like me that have to like basically come out in every single meeting, every single like day of my life, I have to come out to so many people. That's one time I don't have to be like, my name is Lindsay, I use they and then pronouns, please use them. It gives me an opportunity to really set my armor down and say,
Mm-hmm.
I'm Lindsay, I use they and them pronouns, thank you for doing that. That's like a super easy signal that somebody can do that doesn't make it weird that you're like, I think you might be a little bit like queer, but I'm not going to ask you that. It's like a really great way for you to set up an environment where people like me feel safe to be able to tell you that. And so like it's a
So even a
really
question like, what would you like to be called?
me. I like to be called
No,
Lindsay.
no, no.
Oh
Right.
yeah,
But
yeah.
I mean,
How can I address
but
you? That's
asking that,
yeah,
yeah, asking that, what would you like to be called?
yeah. I mean, it's like a really simple way for people to, especially given that in the federal setting, healthcare records are being changed right now, back to birth sex and back to name it discharge or name it entry in the military. So a lot of people's records are actually, without their consent, being reverted back to their dead names. And so it really does offer the opportunity for you to be able to say, how would you like to be referred? How can I talk to you? Or how can I best address you? And give people an opportunity to set that down. So like
So we have a
not worry.
question in the, yeah, we have a
Yeah,
question in the chat. Can you explain they, them? So we're using that pronoun correctly. I love this
yeah.
question. We had
So
this question, we talked about this when we were prepping
yeah.
because one of my kiddos is they, them. And we talked about how you gave me some great pointers about, like, because I
Oh
have
yeah,
this
the mouse in the
habit,
pocket. Yeah.
the mouse in the pocket.
So they and them is a single. It can be used as a single pronoun, and it is a way for folks that identify as anything other than male and female, or she, her, and they and he, him, to be able to live in a world that doesn't tell me where I am or who I am based off of my sex. And so they and them is used as a singular pronoun. You still use it in very similar ways, like when in language and in sentences. Don't worry about using they is, like they are is still like a regular thing. However, using it as an individual singular pronoun. I know some people have challenges with this, and so I gave Carrie my little pointer is that if you have a challenge, there's two ways that I would tell you if you're not familiar with using they and them pronouns, there's two ways that I would tell you to work towards being able to use them more regularly. One is you're never going to go wrong by using somebody's name. So if you're uncomfortable, you don't quite know how to use they, them, use Lindsay. My in-laws had a really hard time using they and them, and so they would just say Lindsay all the time, all the time. And eventually it got annoying. So they're like, okay, now I'm going to take the next step and I'm going to start to use they because like Lindsay seems like a lot. And so they would just use my name. And so that was one way to like gender the way that they addressed me. And it was actually really affirming. So if you're uncomfortable with they and them, first names are usually almost always, especially if you've asked somebody, how would you like to be addressed? The name is never going to be the thing that's offensive. It's always the like trying to put people in a box that ends up being more offensive. Now, my cute one, which I give to people, should you get really like be really hung up on the like they and them being used as a singular, I always tell people to pretend there's a little mouse in my pocket. And so when you're thinking about like me and my mouse walking around, it's they. And so the mouse in the pocket becomes like Lindsay and their mouse. And so it's like
Here they
funny
come.
way.
Here they come.
Here they come, walking down the aisle or walking down the hallway. So like really just practicing, I think is another way. I think, if you're not familiar, you want to just practice. There's nothing offensive about calling anybody they them because when you don't know somebody, you're making guesses. An educated guess because somebody's like longer hair, the way that they dress. Like our dog, like we gender our dogs and we don't know anything about them. Like we think about the world as very hyper sexed, but ultimately we don't know who anybody is. And
Mhm.
there's like a rant that somebody went on about like the gym weights not being racked like appropriately. I can't believe they would do that. But like it was all about saying like if you're this mad about this, you can understand that they is a single pronoun because they are the ones that didn't get their weights put back. I thought that was really funny. Like it can be expansive to understand that this can be used as a singular pronoun. The other part that I know that people get hung up on, my mom was a big one about they and them being like a plural and
Yeah, it's
singular.
because all of us who grew up in the 70s, 80s we had to diagram sentences in English class.
Yes. I mean, so when you think about language, quite honestly, like everything was made up. Every
Yeah.
pronoun, every way that we address somebody all came from somewhere. When we talk about they and them being used as plural or not, everything's made up. We made up ways to talk
Hmm.
about people on a regular basis that we just accepted and never wanted to change. And now here we are. People are asking, can you change that? And my answer to that is yes. Tell me how you want to talk, how you want me to talk to you and how you want me to address you, and I'll do it. And so looking at like expansive language does change over time and
Hmm.
practice makes perfect.
Great. And so it sounds like that is almost, and we'll talk more in the next time we all meet about some really specific things. But it sounds like just that piece is a really good way to start a conversation with somebody and instantly maybe help them take a breath and feel comfortable.
The first thing that you can do is welcome. You really truly welcome people to your space and help them know that you are a person that they can trust. I'm going to do one thing here. I just dropped a link in the chat for anybody that wants it. We have a training that we do on gender minority veterans. There's a bunch of information about the history of women and trans folk serving. It also, at the very end, the last like 5 or 6 slides are all about really space setup and program design and how do
Mhm.
you create these spaces that are affirming and what can you do that are like signals of safety to people that might not feel that safe in these spaces. And so I highly encourage you to take a look if you have some time and you want to, you can download this as well. I'm going to drop a couple other links here in a second. One is to the needs assessment that I shared with you all. I don't know that these are actually going to everybody, so apologies if they're some of my sites.
Well, we can have, yeah, PsychArmor can capture those and put them in the right place in the chat.
And then my last one here is funny. I like to leave with a little levity. The Daily Show recently did a segment on transgender service members, and I have to tell you, I laughed my butt off.
It was
Um,
super, super funny.
really
Yeah.
enjoyed that. My favorite line from the entire session was, "Transgender people too strong for sports, too weak for the military."
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Also, PsychArmor folks, do we have a couple of questions that we wanted to have people answer for us in terms of wanting to make sure we've captured the needs of the people who participated? How'd we do? What else do we want to? Okay, so as you're logging off, you're going to see a little survey. And is it a QR code or is it a survey? PsychArmor. It's a survey. We'd love to have you take that. It will help guide as we move forward in this series where we go and shift course if we need to. So please spend a couple minutes doing that. We want to thank everybody for participating today, and we will see you and some additional colleagues in our next conversation, which is same time next week. Thank you, Elsie, for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. And as Carrie said, ask me anything, even in the survey, and I will make sure that we bring it to the next session. So the more you tell us what we can do to help, and the more we can tailor this to be effective and helpful for all of you. So thank you for spending some time with us today.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everybody.